Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 255, Restaurant Menu Labeling, what those numbers really mean. Hello and welcome back to Real World Nutrition. I'm Shelley Rael, registered dietitian nutritionist, and I'm glad you're here today. I am talking about something that most people have probably seen hundreds of times, even if you've not paid attention to it. And those numbers that are next to menu items at many restaurants. So maybe you're at a fast food restaurant and you see $5.40 next to a burger. Or you're ordering a coffee and you see $2.80 next to that drink. Maybe you're at a movie theater and there are calorie numbers next to the popcorn and snacks. Maybe you don't want to see those, but they're there. Have you noticed them? And if you have, were you aware of what those numbers were or what they actually mean? So that's what I'm covering today. Restaurant menu labeling, what those numbers really mean. And as always, if you want more details about this, I have a companion blog that I've linked in the show notes that gives more detail, more specifics, but I want to give you enough information today to understand what those numbers are, why they're there, and what they can and cannot tell you, and how I think about people using them in the real world. All right, so first up, what are those numbers? So starting with the basics. Those numbers are the calorie content of a standard menu item. And I want to make that clear, that word is standard, because that calorie number that's listed on the menu is based on the item as the restaurant normally prepares it. So let's say you order a burger, and that calorie number on the menu board or in the printed menu you're holding, that reflects the standard burger as they normally prepare it at that restaurant. That doesn't necessarily reflect the burger after you've added extra cheese, removed the bun, added avocado, changed the sauce, or made any other modifications that you could. And the same thing happens with coffee drinks. The calorie number may be used for a specific size, milk type, number of syrup pumps, whipped cream, and toppings. And then once you change those things, that can change the calorie content. So don't assume that the number you see on the menu automatically applies to a customized version that you purchased or ordered. So I want to back up and address, why are calories on restaurant menus? Well, restaurant menu labeling became a federal requirement as part of the Affordable Care Act. Generally, chain restaurants and similar retail food establishments with 20 or more locations are required to provide calorie information for the standard menu items. So that includes most of the fast food restaurants, coffee chains, sit-down restaurants, convenience stores with prepared foods, and other establishments. And the idea behind the menu labeling was pretty straightforward. Give consumers nutrition information so they can make informed choices if they want to. And that's something I want to emphasize, that last part, if they want to. So this isn't to force everyone to count calories. It isn't there to tell you what you should or should not order. And it isn't supposed to give anyone permission to judge what another person orders. It's information. That's it. You do with that information what you will. You can notice it, ignore it, blow it off, go, maybe I might want to change something or do something a little bit different. So the information is there, but the big question has always been, do people actually use the information? Well, some people do, and some don't. In my experience, I find that most people don't even notice the numbers. I noticed these years ago before it was required. I remember seeing it on a menu board at a restaurant I went to, and the other 3 people I was with didn't even notice that they were there. Some people do notice the numbers, but they don't care. Some find them helpful when comparing menu items. Some people find calorie information stressful and overwhelming. Research, however, Research on menu labeling has found mixed result when it comes to whether the information actually changes what people order. Because the menu labeling was around in some municipalities before it became required federally across all those chain restaurants. So some places did it before, so we had some early research on it. And again, it was mixed results. And that makes sense. Because think of the reasons you might choose a particular restaurant meal. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you're craving something specific. Maybe you're meeting with friends. Maybe it's your birthday. Maybe you have 20 minutes for lunch and need something fast. Maybe your kids are screaming in the back seat. Maybe you have a coupon. Maybe it's cheap. Maybe it's the only restaurant nearby. There's a lot of factors involved in food choices. And again, it's not judging where people are eating. There's all these reasons, more than the ones I just mentioned. So one piece of information is the calorie count for people to make informed choices if they want to. But again, it's not the only factor driving the decision. Now, I do want to mention this. Calories can add up quickly. When we eat out at a restaurant, it is easy for those calories to add up quickly. Even if you're hyper aware of it, it adds up fast. So that's where one thing on the menu labeling can do really well. It can make some of those restaurant portions a little bit more visible, more in the forefront. Because sometimes we look at an entree and forget about everything else. And I mention this to people. So you order the burger and you think about the calorie content of the burger. But then there's the fries, then there's the regular soda, maybe there's an appetizer shared, maybe there's a dessert. Or maybe you're getting a coffee drink and your drink is one part of that, but you also got a pastry. So I just point this out because sometimes people notice the calorie number for the main item, but don't take into consideration the calorie content of the entire meal or the entire purchase or what all you're eating. So again, sometimes people order the burger, the fries, and the drink, but they only look at the calorie count of the burger, and just the mindset is that that's the only calories that count. They don't add it all together. And it's not a deliberate act. It's just the human brain focuses on that one thing. So that's the reason I just say looking at the whole order can sometimes be helpful, be useful. And again, it's not because I want people to add up every calorie. Because sometimes the extras are where you really see the difference though. Or I should say rather, it's when we have those extras where you really see the difference. And then the other part here, we've got to just acknowledge this. Some restaurant portions are enormous. When I occasionally see a burger listed at more than 2 calories all by itself, I noticed, and I have seen that at some larger chain restaurants that are known for their larger portions. Some portions are just absurd. And again, I don't want to say that burger should be forbidden, but do want to just acknowledge, for most of us, that's a lot of food. And then having that information available can be useful. But I want to also consider this. Calories are only one piece of the puzzle. So this is probably the most important nutrition point I want to make about menu labeling. Calories aren't the whole story. A lower calorie menu isn't automatically nutritious. A higher calorie item isn't automatically unhealthy. Nutrition, the whole package, is much bigger than calories. So if we're looking at something that seems like it's higher in calories, but let's take a look at it in more detail. I'm not saying that you need to, but we've got to consider there's protein in there. There might be fiber. There's probably sodium. What type of fat is it? Is it added sugars? What's the portion size? And what I like to say, most importantly, what does the rest of your eating pattern look like? So let's say you're choosing between 2 meals. One has fewer calories, but very little protein or fiber. The other has more calories, but it includes vegetables, beans, whole grains, and a reasonable amount of protein. So which one there is healthier? you can't really answer that question just by looking at calories alone. So that's why I don't want anybody walking away from this episode thinking that the lowest number on the menu is automatically the best choice, because it isn't. So what happens when you customize an order? Now, this is where the menu labeling can get a little bit interesting, a little bit confusing. So restaurants have to provide the calorie information for their standard menu items, but people customize their food all the time. So I want to just make this a little bit more clear. There can be a big difference between the standard item and the customized version. So think about a coffee drink. You can change the milk, you can change the number of syrup pumps, you can add whipped cream, you can remove whipped cream, you can add cold foam, you can add toppings, you can change the size. And in all of those things, the calorie number will shift, and it can be very different. Now, the nice thing about this is that technology has made it easier. So while we may be looking at a menu board at the drive-thru, if you have the restaurant app or even the online ordering, it can show you calorie information as you customize the order. And that can be useful if you want to know what your particular order contains. But again, useful doesn't mean mandatory. You don't need to customize your food based on calorie numbers. You can use the information if you find it helpful. And another thing I want to make clear is, does menu labeling mean you should always choose the lower calorie option? Well, no, it's a free country. You can choose whatever you want, and that's not necessarily what I recommend, because this is where the context of your overall eating pattern is important. So maybe you're ordering lunch on a regular Tuesday and want something that leaves you feeling comfortable and energized for the rest of the afternoon. Maybe you choose a smaller meal. Maybe you choose a side salad instead of fries that day. Maybe you get water instead of a sugary drink, or a no-calorie drink instead of one with sugar. Those are just options. But maybe you're celebrating your birthday. You're on vacation. You're meeting an old friend you haven't seen in years. Maybe you really want the burger and fries. You can order the burger and fries. Restaurant meals can fit into a healthy eating pattern. And the goal isn't to make every restaurant meal as low calorie as possible. The goal is to have an overall eating pattern that supports your health while also allowing you to participate in your life. So if you're going out to a restaurant meal all the time, whatever that means for you, several times a week, you may want to take this a little bit more seriously than somebody who's maybe doing it once a week or less than that. Not to say it has to be serious every time. It's just, again, the context of everything. If somebody eats out a lot, they may want to consider how that's impacting them. But what about the people who do find calorie labels stressful? So you may have not noticed those numbers before, but others not only notice it, but get stressed about it, because not everyone benefits from seeing these numbers. And for some people with a history of disordered eating or an eating disorder, calorie information can sometimes become stressful or triggering. And I don't want to dismiss that. Nutrition information can be helpful without becoming something you feel compelled to track. And if you find that you're unable to order food without calculating, comparing, or worrying about all the numbers, that's a different situation from casually looking at the information and deciding whether it's useful to you. So more information isn't automatically better for everyone. So the goal is to use this information in a way that supports your health rather than creating any type of stress around eating. Now, here's another piece of the puzzle. Restaurants provide the information. They don't provide nutrition counseling. So I say this a lot. That's a distinction I make a lot. The information is available to you. How you choose to use it is a whole different ballgame there. So the restaurant provides the information, and nutrition professionals like myself help provide the education for individuals. So restaurants aren't expected to teach you nutrition science. That's not what it's for. They're providing data about their food. A calorie number tells you something about the energy content of that specific menu item. It doesn't tell you whether that food fits into your health goals. It doesn't know what you've eaten the rest of the day. It doesn't know whether you're training for a marathon. It doesn't know whether you're trying to gain weight. It doesn't know whether you're managing diabetes, high blood pressure, or another condition. And of course, it doesn't know whether it's your birthday, although some restaurants seem to know when my birthday is, no matter what. But again, that's where the context is. So how should you use the menu labels? Well, there isn't one right answer. If you find the information useful, use it. Maybe you're comparing two meals and the calorie difference helps you decide. I recently was going to get my usual meal, but I thought at a restaurant, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll try something different. The calories were exactly the same, so I was like, well, let me try something different. I didn't like the other one as much because it didn't have as much protein, so I'll probably go back to my old standby. But the point was, I can't decide between 2 or 3 entrees that I might like. Maybe I'll look at the calorie content. And again, not be obsessive about it, but just because I'm aware of what I do and don't need. And a restaurant meal doesn't define your diet. So I do want to come back to this because this sometimes gets lost when we talk about calories. Your health isn't determined by one restaurant meal, not one burger, not one milkshake, not one order of fries, not because you ate a salad. Your overall eating pattern is much more important. How often are you having that shake? How often are you ordering the fries? How often are you eating the salad? And if you're eating a balanced, varied diet most of the time, there's room for restaurant meals. There's room for pizza. There's room for burgers. There's room for dessert. There's room for meals that aren't particularly nutritious, but are part of the experience that you value, the enjoyment of having that meal. And there's also room for choosing something lighter when that is what sounds good. I'm of the point in my life where I'm looking for those smaller portions on restaurant menus. Not all of them have it, but I just found that I am content with the smaller portions. So I look for the smaller portions. And it's not because of the calories, it's because I can't eat that much food anymore. So you don't have to choose between healthy eating and enjoying restaurants. You can do both. So I want to just say what menu labeling does well. If I had to summarize what I think menu labeling does well, is that it provides transparency. It gives people information that they didn't have before this was required. It can help people compare options. It can make some of those enormous restaurant portions more visible at how big they really are. And over time, nutrition labeling and consumer demand can also encourage restaurants to reconsider ingredients, portion sizes, sodium, calories, and other aspects of the menu. But that information alone doesn't change everyone's behavior, and that's okay. Now, I do want to mention a couple other things, is that the calorie counts are required to be listed on the menu. However, additional information such as sodium and protein and other things are not required to be listed on the menu, but should be available. They say by request, but I found that most of the time it's on the website or the app. Or sometimes you just have to do a search, because sometimes even if I'm on the restaurant's website, it's not easy to find the nutrition information, but I do a search and I can find it. Again, that's more if you're looking at want more information about sodium or fiber or protein. But all those numbers on the menu would be too much for a lot of people. Most people don't even know how to manage the calories. I also want to mention one more thing. I said it briefly at the beginning, but I want to make it clear. This is required for restaurants that have 20 or more outlets or of similar. So when I say of similar, Hardee's and Carl's Jr., I don't even know if they're still around, but Hardee's and Carl's Jr. are pretty much the same restaurant, just depending on where you live is what name it goes by. So those aren't two different places. Those are the same place. So if there was 9 or 11 Carl's Jr.'s and 11 Hardee's, they're under the 20 individually, but together there's 22. But because they're the same restaurant, that's 20. So I just want to mention this because local restaurants, we may have a handful of that restaurant in your area, they're exempt. If it's a place where there's only one, they're exempt. But it's more for the national chains that are required to have this, because it is not a cheap thing to do to get those numbers together. It takes some time to get those together. So I just wanted to mention that if you go into a restaurant and you're like, where's the calorie count? Well, consider maybe they're not a chain restaurant, or maybe they are a chain, but they're not a large chain restaurant. All right. So with this, I want to give the bottom line, some key takeaways here. When you see calorie numbers on a restaurant menu, so again, whether it's the physical menu, on the menu board, at the drive-thru, remember what they actually represent. That's the calorie content of the standard version of that menu item. And your individual modifications change the nutrition information, usually. The numbers can be helpful, but they're not the whole story. Calories are just one part of nutrition. And restaurant meals can fit into a healthy eating pattern. It doesn't mean you have to order the lowest calorie item, but it also means you don't have to ignore the numbers either. You can decide how much, if at all, that information is useful to you. And that's really the point. To reiterate, the restaurant provides the information. You decide what to do with it. Maybe you use it, maybe you don't. Maybe you look at it occasionally. Maybe you find it helpful when comparing two options. Maybe you don't want to look at it at all. You can just ignore the number. Look at the price instead. All of these things are reasonable choices. So the next time you walk into a restaurant and you see those numbers, you don't have to panic, you don't have to calculate, you don't have to judge your meal. Just recognize what those numbers are. Information. Not a grade, not a command, and definitely not a measure of whether you had a good or bad meal. All right, I hope you found this information helpful. Share it with someone who's ever stared at a restaurant menu trying to figure out, what are those numbers? What are those numbers? What do they actually mean? Some people may think it's obvious. A lot of people don't pay attention to them, or have not noticed it, or may not even have registered what that could mean. And again, if you want more details about this, check out that companion blog that I have linked in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. Take care, and bye for now.